Hello and welcome to Identity Leathercraft. Today we're going to be looking at making a possibles pouch, which is great for bushcraft, keeping fire starting kit in, all sorts of useful things. They tend to just be a drawstring pouch with a bit of structure to them. So it's going to give you some introduction to leathercraft, a little bit of stitching, a little bit of sewing and a little bit of threading and cutting. So things you're going to need to have to hand, you're going to need a ruler, just a standard normal ruler, a good pair of scissors, and you're going to need an awl, leatherworker's awl, which is just something that has a sharp tip point for making holes in the leather, a pen, a pencil or biro, and you should have in the kit with the leather, a needle and thread. I'm going to use red thread here for today so that you'll be able to see my stitching on the tutorial. And you should have two pieces of leather. You should have a piece that is a tan colour and a piece that is a brown or a tan but is really soft. And that's what we're going to make the pouch part out. So this piece we call soft calf leather. It has a suede side on one side and a grain side on the other. And those terms are going to be something you'll need to remember for the tutorial. So again, on the vegetable tan, this is a vegetable tan piece of leather, it's in its natural colour, which will just darken with use. This has a smooth side, the grain side, and a hairy side on the back. You will also need to have some sort of old magazine or newspaper or a notebook that's got card or paper cover on the front. This is for when we make the stitch holes with the awl. We're going to push through the leather into this, so it is going to damage it, so it needs to be something old that it doesn't matter what you do with it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut out our template out of paper, but before we do that, just with the awl, go through and make some holes in those circles that you can see around the edge, and that's just going to be so that you can mark through with a pen onto the leather. So all of those circles need a little hole, and including the circle that's in the center piece of it, of the template, which is just not quite showing on the screen. Okay. So all of those holes, go round with your awl, making a mark. Then you can cut out your template. So you'll have a shape that looks like this with the tabs on it. And we're going to cut out our circle out of the leather. So you want to turn the leather over, and this side here, which you can see, is what we call the grain side. So it's sort of smooth. And this side we call the flesh side, which is suede, or a bit hairy if you like. So if I say those terms, that's something you're going to need to know. The grain and the flesh side. So place it with the grain side down, put your template over, and with your pen draw around. Just fold those bits up out of the way if you need to, and then if you want to get your circle accurate, just turn it like that to get a full circle. And with your pen and those holes that you made in the template earlier, push through that little hole to leave a mark onto the leather, and then when that mark is there, just draw a little line going down from it to give you your cut lines. And you also want to mark through, which I haven't done on this one, the hole for the center, just so that we can line things up later. So there we go. And then we need to mark up our template for our vegetable tan piece. This is a little bit of a sturdier piece that's going to create some of the shape and structure for our pouch. So one of the best things to do for that is to use a ruler. If you have one, just a standard width ruler. If you turn that over, that should be the same width as your strap. Otherwise, cut out your template from here So cutting out this particular section here, and here's one I did earlier. So with your ruler, if you've got a ruler, this will just give you much straighter lines than trying to draw around your template, but it's not, it's an optional thing. So draw down with the ruler and your pen, and again you're going to do this on the fluffy side, and then put your template over and draw your end in place, either end, your circle, and again those holes there, there, and in the centre. Okay, and when you've done that with both of those two pieces, you then need to cut them out with your scissors. A little tip, if your scissors are not very sharp, you'll find that when you're cutting paper, you tend to use these ends and they get blunter first, and this bit behind the back here is sharper. So a little trick, if your scissors are a bit blunt, is to work into that back bit. So put the leather right to the back there, grab a hold of it as you're cutting, and then keep pulling it as you're cutting it through to keep it to the back of the scissors, like so. I'm going to use my sharper scissors for the rest. Do check with the person who owns the scissors whether it's okay for you to use them on the leather. So you want to cut out your two pieces, and when you've cut them out, you want to cut some slits in this piece, and the way to do that is just to fold them over sort of to the centre of that line, and then gently and carefully cut, so when you open it up you have a hole, and that hole will be what you're going to thread your drawstring through. Okay, so go round and do all of those cuts as well, and then you can leave that one to one side for a moment. And then going back to the piece that you've cut out on your vegetable tan leather, you want to bring it up with the template, and on the template you'll see that there are some cross marks marked on it. So if you lay it down, and this time you want the leather to be smooth side up, lay it down on your block or magazine that you're using, position your template over the top, and you want to try not to move this. And then with your awl, you want to find those holes that are your stitch marks. They're going to make your holes for sewing and stitching. Line it up, and you want to sort of push down from on top. Sometimes it's easier to stand up to do this. Keep your fingers quite close to the paper and the leather to stop it moving, but obviously don't stab your fingers, and press through. And when you take it off, you should be able to see the holes in the leather, but just to be doubly sure, we're going to really open them up for making the stitching easier. So this bit's a bit tougher. You need to push the awl right the way through and make a bigger hole. Now this tool is called an awl, it's spelled A-W-L, and it's probably one of the most handy things. With this you can make and repair all sorts of leather articles, so you want to keep this handy. And go through and make all those cross marks and make your stitch holes into your leather. When that's done, this is where you needed to line up your stitches. If you've got a little bit of Pritt stick or anything, you can use that just to hold the leather in place, but otherwise it should just hold. So if you fold it over until you can see the dot here, and just position it to line up with the dot on the template underneath, and then that's going to give you the marker point of where this needs to be stitched. And holding it in place, you need to go through the leather and once again make holes in the leather underneath. So going through the holes you've already made, you're going to go through and make a hole in the leather underneath. So don't worry if you can't see them immediately, we're going to go through and do the opening up action like we did on the other item. So if you go through all the way around and down, holding it as carefully as you can. If you lose track and you think you need to move it, go back to your spot, measure your spot again, and then find one of your holes that you just did and line it up underneath to the hole that you're in, just to make sure you keep in that same line. Once you're through onto the softer leather, you can then pull up the softer leather and just open up those holes again. And then we'll catch up to do the sewing. Just before we start sewing, don't forget you're going to need to cut your slits in on these marks here as well. So same principle, fold the leather over and gently cut and carefully cut those so that you've made a hole there for your lace to go through later. So then we're going to get our needle and thread. There are lots of different stitches you can do with Leathercraft. We're just going to do a simple one. So you want to put a knot in one end, and one of the easiest ways to do that is to get your thread, wrap it around your finger and then roll it off your finger and pull with your fingernail down, and it puts a little knot in the end. Takes a bit of practice that, otherwise just put a knot in any old how. And then if you thread your needle, you'll see they've got a nice large eye, so it shouldn't take too long, and pull quite a bit of the thread through so you've not got too much kind of getting in your way. And then we're going to start at the top, so put your needle in the top hole there and pull it through and to there. Now when you're an advanced leather worker, you'll learn a stitch called saddle stitch. We're going to just do a simpler version today called back stitch. So if you push your needle through the hole, one down, to make a stitch like this, and then from the back, and this is where it's a bit tricky to see sometimes because of the darker colour, you're going to come up to the stitch one below it, like that, and then you're going to go backwards on yourself so that you end up with two stitches close together like this. And this is another method of stitching, which is just a simple running stitch, and it works quite well for holding it in place, and you can always go back over and go on the stitches in between, or it's just a quicker stitch. So again, you start with your knot in the end that you make by wrapping around your finger like so, rolling it off the end of your finger and then squeeze it down to create a knot in the end of the thread. Start at the top hole. Some of you may have done this stitch already, and if you've done any other sort of sewing, but it is quite a useful one. Now my top hole is not very open, so sometimes you might need to go back and make sure your holes were open in case you missed any when you were making them at the beginning. Oops. I'm going to get my needle in my leather there, lined up, pull that through to the knot, and then for this one you're just going to keep working on your way down. So we go down a stitch, like that, come back up, go down the next hole, come up through the next hole along and down. And it's called running because it just kind of runs along, so just going in and out, and just try to make sure you get your holes lined up. If you're struggling to find the hole on the back of the softer piece of leather, just take the needle through and then you can open up and you can see where you need to go on your next piece. So I'll do a couple more and then show you. And when we're doing leatherwork stitching, we use quite strong thread. It's quite hard to stitch leather. It's kind of a good exercise for your hands. Leather workers were very strong, and we also use a waxed thread. So we use beeswax to wax the thread, which makes it slide through the leather a lot easier. So unlike other stitching where you can use a sharp needle, like if you were sewing on fabric, you can use a sharp needle and go all the way through in one go. With this method, we've made our holes first, and then this needle we're using is a little bit blunt, and it just helps us find, in theory, the holes. But this hole I forgot to open up, so I'm just going to go back and make sure that I've got these open. So don't be afraid to get your awl, keep your awl handy. Any of you who've watched the repair shop will see Susie always has one of these in her hand. And if you've watched any other leather crafters on YouTube, you'll see they tend to keep their awl handy, just so that you can go back and open up. So if I do a little bit more down here, and then you can see that this is now holding the leather in place in that stitch, and that's what we want when we're stitching. We want the leather to be held together in the layers. You can see on this side, this is the back stitch side, which is much more sort of almost like a machine stitch, and it looks like that on the back, whereas the running stitch looks like that. Tying off the thread. So I've got to the end of my section here. I'm just going to go through that top bit and turn to the back of my leather. And if I take the needle underneath the next stitch down and make a little loop like that, and then I'm going to take the needle through the loop and pull it. So I'll do that once more. Take the needle through that last stitch, make a loop, pull the needle through and pull, and that will make a knot just on that bottom stitch. So pull it nice and tight, and when you've got it nice and tight, and that's again the beauty of working with the wax thread, it helps you to pull your stitches nice and tight. You can snip off your thread end. So there we have our pouch liner stitched in place, and now all we need to do is to thread through our drawstring. Attaching the drawstring. Now we've got a large eye stitching needle, but the chances are that your thread is not going to fit through it. So with get your length of lace, and this just gives it a bit of a stiffen. If you've got a piece of sellotape or masking tape, any kind of tape really, just wriggle it round and attach it to the needle. There we go. I'm just going to press that down so it's not too chunky, and that's just going to give me a lacing needle end for threading through. As you start getting nearer to the end of your threading up, you can turn it so that the pouch is, the inside is inside, and you can start pulling it just so that you know how much lace you're going to need. And I'm just going to make sure my slit through these two layers, this is where they often don't just meet up, so they might need a little bit of an extra snip. In fact, I think I forgot to do that one, that's why. Just check that one is lined up now. Yeah. Okay, so the last thread should come out onto that top bit. Just work that bit out. And you can start pulling your pouch into shape. Let's take the sellotape off the needle now. There we go, and I'm just going to trim that off at the end there. And at this point you just need to thread your bead on and then tie your two lengths into a knot and make sure that the bead won't slide off that knot. The bead should then push up and close your Possibles pouch